Impact that Kate had on my life is when she came to live with me in 1965. And she wanted to know where did I go to church. And I said, you won't go to church. And so she said, oh, we got to go to church. And so we went and started going, and through her, I accepted Christ, at this little corner, a little storefront church with Bishop Foster. And she helped me, showed me so many things, and she helped me with so many things. She taught me how to keep house, and taught me how to take care of my business, the household business, not outside business, but inside business. And this is a woman that didn't have no education, but she knew. She had that, what the old people used to call mother wit. She knew how to take care of her things. And she was a joy in my life. We had such moments where I could talk to her about anything. And I would say, don't tell Ed. She said, baby, it'll die in me like a disease. And that just went so far with me that I could confide. Not like, she wasn't my mom, but she was my mom. And that was the life I had with Kate. And she became not only like a mom to me, but she was my best friend. She was my very best friend. So it took me a moment to realize that I won't have my friend no more. That was the impact that Kate had on my life.
Rise from the ashes, everywhere that we go, our light be flashing. 'Cause you're alive, yes you're alive. You can rise as you dancing off the ashes. Rise from the ashes, so everywhere that we go, our light be flashing. 'Cause you're alive, yes you're alive. You can rise as you dancing off the
what she told us about God. We tried it, and it's exactly what she said. So I think that's probably the part that I'm thinking that, don't ever dumb down your impartation, what you have to give. It may not look like it's valuable right now, because it just didn't seem like it would be. We're at the table like this. Is this ever going to be like this? Is this prayer going to last much longer? Because this Sunday we want to go out and play. We want to go out, we want to go do kid stuff. But after so many times, and I think that's where the repetition maybe is, because it wasn't necessarily a different prayer every time. And so therefore it became the prayer. And so even if you missed it 2 weeks ago, you know what she prayed, because it's the same prayer. So, and I remember she used to say in every prayer, and I may not be here with y'all much longer, but remember God. Those are the ringing words. He'll always be with you. I may not be with you, but he'll always be. He thinking it's, you ain't a fan of that. She didn't move from it. You couldn't convince her away from it. And although the prayer may to some people have been primitive and or repetitious, she believed it. And when she taught it to us, obviously we believed it, because the question keeps coming up like, where's Kaite Jones? Well, Kaite Jones lives in me. Kaite Jones is right here because what she imparted, what she gave to me, what she gave to my siblings has passed through generations. It was given to my mother, it was given to us. I gave it to mine. Mine is now giving to hers, and my siblings the same thing. We all got past the introduction to God at that dining room table because before her there was no church. We didn't go to church. We didn't, there was no, I don't recall a Bible in our house. I don't recall talking about God in our home. But when Kaite Jones hit the scene, and I remember the story my mother sharing with me, saying that she asked when she first got to New York, it's like, well, what church do y'all go to? And my mother's first response was, well, we don't go to church. And she put a halt to that right away. Oh yeah, we going to church. Oh yeah, we now mind you, she's coming into their home, and she's making a declaration that we will be going to church. See, and so this is the type of person that Kaite Jones was. In other words, she didn't back down. She could have came and said, well, I'll just have to find me a church, and if y'all don't want to go, that's just on y'all. But she knew the importance. I got to pull my whole village with me. We all going, we all going to church. So my mother got saved because my grandmother insisted that we go to church. And so this is kind of the onset, the building of our family and our relationship and connection to God. And I'll say this, just a little sidebar. This is why it's important for our children to have the introduction to God. And this is where that scripture becomes very, very relevant. What am I saying? Relevant to us today is that if we are, let's say, introduced to the Word of God, if we are now poured into with the Word of God, it's only going to be so far before we find ourselves coming back to what we know. We won't drift. We may drift, but we won't stay there because the seed has been planted. And that's where we've got to find our Kaite Joneses. We've got to find our rightful place so that we can make these type of impartations. We didn't even understand back then that's what it was. It was just an impartation to us. It was just a part of her role. And she didn't have a title. She didn't carry a church title to do it. She did it from the dining room table at our home. And most of the time, that's where we forget that that's where God needs to be in the beginning. It's great that we go to church and find Christ, but if it ain't in the home, if Christ and God is not being introduced to our children and our grandchildren in the home, then it's going to be a miss and it's going to be a hit and miss. You're going to have one or two that may find themselves straight away. But when I call my sisters and my brothers, even if we're not doing it all right, they have a reverence for God. There's a place that we don't play. Okay, you might play about a lot of things, but the seed of reverence for God was imparted into us, and that's a place we don't play. So we don't go there with the things of God. If we ain't gonna live right or do right, okay, that's it. But we're not gonna touch God. We're not going to disrespect or dishonor. We don't. As a matter of fact, I have another memory. My father had made a statement because he found a snake in our home. We found a snake in the house one day, and my father made a statement that because he was so afraid of the snake, he misspoke and said that if he stayed in that house that night, that God was a bad word. I'm not gonna say the word, but he said, but if I stay in this house tonight, God is, he's something, and it wasn't a nice word. Well, we went into instant shock those children that were at home. We didn't know what to do with that. Because God was real to us, like, to the point like, did you really just say that God was, this, that, or the third? It shocked our system because we just couldn't believe that he called God to that. Well, needless to say, he stayed in the house that night. Me personally, I'd have slept in the car just because I said something so stupid. But nevertheless, he didn't. He stayed in the house. But it was something that bothered my psyche for a long time, that he would bring that type of wording to God. And all of that stems back to Kaite Jones, what she had imparted, what she had instilled into us. The day that woman passed away in February of 1974, the day that she departed, I felt like I had lost my mind. I'm 10 years old. I would have been 11 that March, because she died in February. She died at 74, so I was 10 years old and about to be 11. And the day that she died, I literally felt like something broke. Something, when they said it, I almost couldn't understand what they were saying. It's like, can you repeat that? Can you say that again? But we were kids, so we didn't really get the advantage of details. I knew she was in the hospital and I knew she was sick, but she's grandma. And grandma prayed. And so grandma was going to be okay. So, this was not supposed to happen. So when they said, well, grandma died, okay, died. What's that? What does that mean? She's not coming back. She's not coming back. What? So my whole mind could not fix it. And I remember not wanting to go outside and play. I remember being in the house just quiet. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. This was a time where my father lost it. So he was not where we could lean on him. And because he lost it, my mother had to probably be to him what he needed to help him, hold it together. But I don't recall that presence of her for us, for the kids. When she died, we lost our comfort and we lost our shield. We lost the one who would, if everybody else was doing their own thing, she was the one that was going to be there to help us get through what we need to get through. So when that day when she died, we were all fending for ourselves, emotionally fending for ourselves. And I think that it seemed like it was forever between the time they announced her death and us actually burying her. But at 10, it could have been just in my head. But we had to go all the way to South Carolina from New York. And I remember the day of, we were all prepping. We all had to wear white. All the grandkids, girls had to wear white dresses and, we white from head to toe. I remember getting there. My stomach is nervous. I don't know what to expect. I don't know. This is my first death. I don't know what death is. I have never experienced it. I don't know what, to make of this thing. But when we get there, I don't know if you all know, but back they had the coffin. It was already open. And when we walked in with the family, I could see her nose. This is my first memory of her after her announcement of death. The coffin was open and I could see her nose sitting up. That's all I could see. And when I got to the coffin, there was my protector, motionless, not moving, and I just lost it there. I knew she wasn't coming back home, and I started to scream, "Don't leave me." I knew then I was just going to be on this journey alone. And I began to scream, "Don't leave me, Grandma, don't leave me, don't leave me." And of course, they usher you away from the coffin. And I fell into my mother's and my father. They were there. I already been sitting. My father was just a crumbled mess. He was unable to console us. My mother, unable to console us. And at that moment, a lot of my memories are gone at that point, because I think at that point there was a shutdown for me. And I remember thinking, like today, before I got ready to do this show, I said to myself, "Kaite Jones, I wish I had known to love you better. I wish I had known to embrace you more and get, like, how you got a lemon or something and you try to get as much juice as you can from it. I wish I had squeezed a little harder and got a little bit more out of it, because that's how much she impacted us. That's how much our lives needed her." And from that day, this is no slight. I spoke to my mother about this before and told her about, this is no slight to you, but this is just the importance of what is needed in the family to embrace our Kaite Joneses and allow them the nurturing and the embracing for the generations to come. And so, no slight to them, my mother and my father, because it's just facts of what it was. But our house became chaotic at that point, after her death. It became a house of horror in some cases. Things were said and done that Kaite Jones would have never allowed, or never in a million years permitted to happen. Some of our worst memories that I can think of, as far as how family struggles financially, emotionally, even physically, happened after Kaite Jones's departure. And I think about it this day. I still am thankful for those short, almost 10 years that she came, because it was so full of what we needed, that even though we went through those years of horror, or I say bad days, the family breaking down but not broken up. Does that make sense? Let me see. Breaking down but stayed together. So it's just a lot of drama, a lot of, abuse, mentally, physically, vices, all of this abuse that's going on in the family. All of this kind of just, like, Kaite Jones was like the keeper, the doorkeeper, or the one on the wall. She kept the enemy at bay, so to speak. But it seemed like at her death, when she left, that there was no one there to now keep back the hand of the enemy. And so that's what it appeared to be. Now, I'm much more knowledgeable today to know that what she had imparted into us at the time was just a seed. And the seed in the ground doesn't seem to appear to be very much. It just seems like a little dot in the dirt. But over the years, during those times that was so bad sometimes, that little seed was growing. Those moments, those times that she imparted into us, they were growing and they became what we are today. I would not dare say that Katie Jones had nothing to do with being the woman of God that I am today. She had a whole lot to do with that. She had a whole lot to do with, I say, the confidence. Although the enemy tried to rob me of that several times, the confidence, you know, knowing who you are, just being okay with who you are. I remember this memory. Oh God, thank you. I remember this memory that my grandmother was. She was the neighborhood referee. We would go outside and we would play. She believed in clean the house and get outside. And be in here tearing up the house all day. Clean up and go outside, go play. So we would go outside, and she was that kind of grandmother. She was interactive. She just didn't sit you outside and just be in her room parlaying in the bed watching the stories. That's just what she didn't do. Now, she did watch stories, but most of the time, if she couldn't sit out there on the porch and watch us play, most of the time we wasn't going to be out there. We were going to be in the yards where she can keep an eye. And so she was the referee. She would keep the order. She would make sure everybody played fair, and if we couldn't get the call on, that we were playing, if the teams couldn't figure out was it were they out or were they in, we would look to her. Everybody would look to the grandma on the porch and say, "What was it?" And she would make the call. Now we didn't know like the call depending on the team you was on, but we had to respect it because she was going to call it fair. But she was that kind of grandmother. She just didn't nurture us. She nurtured the neighborhood. She chasing the neighborhood. Like if one of the kids get cutting up, she'll send them home. Go home. You cutting up too bad. She send them on home. Or on this particular day, this one little girl, she would terrorize me. She just all the time pick on me, pick on me, pick on me. And this particular day, my grandmother was on the porch. She was just bothering me and bothering me. And when I say bothering me, she was physically hitting me, doing things to me, and I don't know why she just picked on me. I think because she was the baby girl in the family. But she, this particular day, my grandmother watched me retaliate with the most fierceness. I had took off my shoe. I had gotten tired of her bullying me. And I took off my shoe and I began to hit her with my shoe. And so my grandmother let me get a couple of good licks in. They said, "All right now, girl. All right now, come on up as on this." And I was crying and I kept thinking to myself, but she bothered me, but my grandmother was like this. She was a fair one. In other words, okay, you got your couple of licks in, now come up on the porch. So even to that extent, she was allowing me to defend myself, but don't take it too far. Come on up here on the porch. So even in those memories, those thoughts, I think about her. She had the balance. She had the ability to see situations, and she wasn't necessarily. I can't remember her being partial to anybody, like being extra for anybody. She was always fair, and it was always seemed to be an equal thing. She taught us all kind. Like if we have a outage and I had to wash clothes and I didn't have a washing machine, I pray God that never happened. But if it ever had to, I know how to wash clothes without a washing machine, because Kaite Jones said we're gonna do laundry even though the washing machine is broke. So she got us a washboard. Where she got it from? Probably out of them pockets. I don't know. But anyway, she brought the washboard, and here we are in the tub washing clothes, because we not only did we wash the clothes in the tub, but we rinsed them, and then we had to hang them outside. She wanted all of her clothes hung outside, so that was a part of our duties. But she was the balance, and when she passed away, it seemed like that balance went away, and so my thought goes back to how our years of development without her in the beginning seemed very hard and unfruitful. But down the road, out of the ground, are these oak trees, boykins, her seeds that are now with our own space. We are now the seed droppers to the next generation. She has put into the ground, into us, things that manifested so many years later through many trials and through many tribulations, through many errors. Because all of us was on here, all of my siblings were on here. We could tell you about the errors and the missteps that we have done, the failures and the faults that we have done. But at the end of the day, we all will attest to this one thing, that Kaite Jones lives, and she lives within us. Her 10 years of impartation have taken us not just in our lifetime, but they will reach well beyond us into our children's and now my grandchildren, and hopefully into my great grandchildren as well, what Kaite Jones was to us. And so when I asked the question, where's Kaite Jones? She's right here. And if I called my daughter Nicole, she would answer, or have to answer, or should answer. She lives here. And then Lala, my granddaughter, hopefully one day will be able to raise her hand and say, here is Kaite Jones right here. Because what was given to me and imparted into me and embedded in my soul will live way beyond me, way beyond Kaite Jones. And so sometimes you don't have to be the rich and the famous to be impactful. You don't have to be the smartest. You don't have to be the brightest. All you have to do is have the love for your seed. And that's what Kaite Jones had. She had a love for us that superseded anything. And she gave to her very last. And I will never forget, ever, as long as I'm living, what she has done for me. I know my siblings, we all have testaments, and we all have memories of her. And they will last us a lifetime. And in this little broadcast, I also get to set into stone her legacy, what she was, and now who she was, and who she is. Because here in Little St. Paul, Kaite Jones lives. So I just want to say thank you for letting me share my heart, my memory, and my legacy of Kaite Jones. God bless you. See you next week.
Miss Kaite Jones is how I knew her. And my memories of her, for the sake of this documentary, is I saw her when I was very young. Maybe the first time I saw her was maybe, I want to say 6, maybe 5. And we lived in Brooklyn back then. And she was, my first memory of her was she was dressed very, very sharply, and she was coming up the stairs. And we lived at that time on a street called Chauncey. And my dad was helping her bring her bags up. And she introduced me to a lot of new words that were from the South that I was completely unfamiliar with. Like words like, I always knew it as hot dog, and she called it a Frankfurter, something like that. And then I also knew what I knew as sneakers, she called tennis. And I remember one time she was asking me to get her tennis from the other room, and I had no idea what she meant. What's a tennis? And she became a little bit annoyed at me because she thought maybe, this kid can't be this dumb. He certainly knows a simple thing like a tennis. And then later on, I learned that tennis meant sneaker. Later on, she moved back to South Carolina because initially she was coming from South Carolina. And I was really too young to know the ins and outs or why she was coming and going. But she finally came to live with us again permanently, I think in the early 70s. I think she was in her, I want to say mid 50s, maybe 51, 52, somewhere in there. And my memories of her were, she was strong and tough, and I didn't always appreciate it back then. I thought she was over the top, more than she needed to be. But she had this way about her that said that she really loved us. And I just, years later, the things that she taught me and the stories that she told me about her life in South Carolina back when she was a child, or back when she was just growing up. It was, I think she was born in 1911 in the spring. And she told me stories about working in the cotton fields. She told me stories about her being a midwife. She told me stories about how she dealt with the men that she had to work around. But one of the things I remember about her the most, the things that affect my life today, she was very clear in her mind about what my relationship with God should be. It was in no uncertain terms. She told me once, anything I need to know about my life, about how I want my life to go, is found in the scriptures. This is what she said. She said to me also one time, if the world, if all your friends are doing this, she said, if they all going this way, she said, you go the other way. That was her statement to me. Because she was basically saying to me is that the world's always going to find a reason to go one way. And she advised me to go the opposite. And I think that to this day, I really believe that helped me make some good decisions in my life. And of course, sometimes I didn't make good decisions, but it was because I didn't follow her advice. She really helped my mom out, because my mom had 7 children, and it was not easy. And so I really appreciate her in so many ways. And here I am older than she is when she passed. And to this day, I still use some of the techniques and learning things that she taught me growing up that I still use to this day. And I cannot stress how much it blessed me now. And this, my grandmother's been dead since, I think, and I'm not sure of the date, but I think it was in February or the early spring of 73, I think. And it really hurt me to see her go. I remember we spent a lot of time in the parking lot at the hospital trying to pass the time of day by, back then kids could sit in the car by themselves and nobody cared. But we did spend a lot of time in the hospital parking lot, because my parents, they were the ones who basically went upstairs to see her. And one of the things I remember her telling me is that you should make sure you know what you're doing now, James, because you never know when you might need the skill. And so she taught me the basics on cooking, basics on sewing, basics on how to clean myself. And I really appreciate that. And I'm hoping that this documentary brings to light all of the things that she did, and that she gets remembered for because all of us have a different memory of her. All of us have a different experience with her. And later on, years later, I wrote a story about her stories to me, and I put them together in this one story. And I want to read it to you, and it really kind of culminates all the stories she told me, or a few of them. Sorry, I shouldn't say all of them. A few of the stories she told me, I culminate them in this story here. And it reads, I named the story A Glimpse of Eden. And it starts off by saying, years ago, we as a family lost a woman who was responsible for bringing both dedication and strength to our lives. And that woman was our matriarch, and she was born in the spring of 1911 in a small town in South Carolina, and her name was Katie. As a child, she had always been interested in nursing in some form or another. She cared for all the small animals she could find, no matter how much her mother protested. She would badger up the family dog, Max, when he clearly had the strength to leave. He would lie there while this young nurse tended to his fictitious wounds and ailments, and then years passed. She and her family had tough times as they lived, or better, survived the Great Depression. Around 1932, she decided to leave the fields where she and her sister had spent many hours in the hot Carolinian sun picking cotton. During the times in the field, she picked up a habit some of the men had been doing for years, smoking these little dark cigars. This revealed her rebellious side. She never shied away from making her presence known among them, so it was almost a rite of passage for her. But the older she got, the more her heart was tugged towards nursing. On one day, while taking a break near the row of houses, she heard an anguished cry of a woman. She rushed in to find an older woman with gray hair helping the young woman, and very pregnant, deliver a baby. My grandmother stood there in amazement at the skill and calmness of this old lady and how she displayed it in the midst of the room filled with cries. The old woman looked back and ordered my grandmother to bring various things, to, in a sense, making herself useful, by watching and comforting the young woman to be. 4 hours had passed as the woman suffered, and the old woman became excited and reminded my grandmother, get ready for a glimpse in Eden. My grandmother remembers the first time she saw a baby come into the world. With that, she cried profusely, as if she knew the woman, and from that day, she saw what she wanted to do. For months afterwards, she volunteered all of her free time assisting the woman in delivering babies. She was taught how to tell the baby was breech or complications involving umbilical cords and many other sundry situations. After about a year and a half, the old lady allowed my grandmother to perform more and more of the procedures. So much so, the old woman began to allow my grandmother to cover one side of town while she took care of the other. This partnership went on for years until one day the old woman passed away shortly after delivering her last baby. The baby was cleaned and wrapped in linen, and the old woman was soothing the child in the rocking chair, and the baby was cooling in her bosom. The new mother reached over and took hold of the baby as the old woman's arms fall to her side with no life in them. The funeral was astonishing. She had touched the lives of so many more than 3/4 of the town's people showed up. My grandmother realized just how important the role of a midwife was. Most in the small town couldn't afford hospital stays, and midwives perform a vital service in the community. It wasn't a job, it was who they were. On call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, these women sacrificed parts of their own lives to give others a chance to begin new ones. My grandmother, all over the next 30 years, delivered or helped deliver many babies in the world, where all were glimpses of Eden. Now, full disclosure, there are parts of that story that I had to piece together based on the story she told me. So you'll notice I didn't mention any names because I didn't have it. But based on my memory of my grandmother's stories, this story is how I remember it. So I'm done. I hope that this helps the documentary. Again, I cherish everything my grandmother did, and I hope that this documentary brings out the true light of how she impacted the lives of her children and her grandchildren. Thank you.
And I remember she used to say at the end of every prayer, and I may not be here with y'all much longer, but remember God. Those are the ringing words. He'll always be with you. I may not be with you, but He'll